Welcome to Piggy Power, and on this episode I'm going to show you how to change a wheel bearing on the front wheel drive of most 90s and early 2000s Peugeots and Citroens. This specific vehicle is a Peugeot 306. Principles will apply, as I say, to most of those front wheel drive, front wheel bearings, 90s, early 2000s Peugeots and Citroens. Let's first show you the tools you'll need. Tools that you're definitely going to want to do this job. Hammers, lever bars, wire brush or wire wheel, WD-40, a cutting disc on something, or a hacksaw, if you're going to go that far with this job. Cheat guns are useful. We got a 30 torque, sometimes it's 27 for the disc retaining screws, or sometimes it's like a 4mm Allen key. 16, 17, 19, 35, 36, 32 sockets, 17mm or 16mm spanner depending on the ball joint. Little punch is handy, not to the face but a metal one, and these special pliers for the circlet. A new bearing. I have a first line bearing here which is that number, however is actually in the box a Borg & Beck which is, get it in focus, that number, which is 26816632223. There we go, that's what that is. And then you want a large press, hydraulic press, minimum 10 tons, or a friendly garage ready to accept your box with hub. As you can see, we've already got this far with the job, ready to push in your new bearing for you. I'm not saying you have to have a 10-ton press, but you're going to struggle without it. 5-ton, 7-ton generally won't crack them off. So you're going to need at least 10-ton, 15 ideally. There you go. So first step is to jack up your vehicle, make it safe. Nice, flat, level, solid ground is the ideal surface to do that on, and get the wheel off. And two of your most vigorous hurdles to overcome, the first of which is undoing this nut behind here. The first thing you need to do is remove this clip, pulls out using a screwdriver, pliers, other implements, and this cap just falls off. As promised, big nut in the middle. This is a 36, sometimes a 35. A 36 will work on the 35s and the 36s. Now, they're really tight. So you're not going to undo it with a little hand socket and ratchet. You're going to need a big old bar, breaker bar, and you need someone inside with a foot on the brake in gear for you to crack that off. Don't push down, lift up, you've got more leverage that way, and you can also put a pin in the vented discs and put a couple of bolts back in this hub, do those up, and that will help you undo it. Alternatively, a massive cheat gun. They are very tight though, so your average simple cheap one from Aldi won't do it. Big Milwaukee, DeWalt, big Ryobis will sometimes do it as well, and there are other brands available on the internet. So, that on there, noise. There we go, and she's come undone. If you haven't got a copper hammer, you've only got a steel hammer, even with a copper hammer, leave the nut on the end of it and give it a tap to get the threads and the splines moving inside the hub. Like that. Till you see it bouncing, and then you know it's free. The reason we keep the nut on it is so you don't damage the threads on your drive shaft. You really don't want to be doing that. That would be a world of pain. Next thing we're going to do is remove the brakes from the hub. Most discs will have retaining screws. These just happen to be a T30, sometimes there are different sizes. You want to do a couple of things with those. You want to make sure they're in good condition. If you're not sure about using a gun on them, don't use a gun on them. Impact screwdriver, or by hand, tapping it as you turn them, and having something to hold the disc so that discs doesn't spin for you, just like we did with the main hub nut. I'm going to use a cheat gun. I'm experienced at using these. If you think you're going to round it off, don't use one. There we go. That's what them looks like. There goes the other one. Okay. Now I did that before taking the caliper off in case it was going to spin, and then I could secure the disc against the caliper carrier and that would stop the disc spinning. Right, I'm going to turn it by hand or with the steering wheel to get hold of the bolts at the back, which in this case are 19mm bolts. In your case they could be a Torx or an 18, usually 19s. Again, I'm using a cheat gun, but you can do this with just ratchets and breaker bars. More difficult? Yes. Possible? Of course. There we go. And we're just inspecting the CV boot while we're here, which looks a little bit weepy, I have to admit. So that will have to get done at a very earliest opportunity. You might need to just push the pallet, the pads and the carrier and the caliper away from the disc like I just did there. Screwdriver or lever bar. Because there's a little lip on the disc unless they're brand new, which these aren't far off new, but there's still a lip. So we're just pushing the piston back in a little bit and we can take the carrier off all in one go. We release it. There's usually a brake hose clip on these, on most vehicles. I'll show you that in a second. There we go, probably a good idea to get that off first. And then I'm going to use an S-hook just to hold the caliper off the ground and then the hose doesn't get caught up on stuff. There we go, you don't want your caliper hanging on the hose. And to identify if you've got a CV boot weeping, the back of the caliper, you've got little bits of CV grease flicking out. And I'm going to bet that, yeah, here somewhere, that boot is getting a bit old. There it is, there's our little leak, so that'll have to get changed soon. That's a bit annoying, isn't it? Hey ho, not the end of the world. We'll sort that out another time. But we're going to work on this hub. Okay, next steps. Before things get a little bit too fruity, we're going to unplug the ABS sensor. If yours hasn't got ABS, then well done for you. This has got ABS, so we're going to unclip it from the clips that are on the hub, just to give us some free play, like that. And we're going to have to take this cover off to be able to gain access to the clip there. On the other side, it goes under. On this side, as you can see, it traces up and over and through this hole into the engine compartment. In your vehicles, or if you're doing the near side, the left side, this clip is under here, underneath the chassis rail, and you have to take this cover off. In this case, we haven't had to do that. So let's get the bonnet up and have a look where that clip goes, where that cable goes, and how to unclip it. So here we are in the engine bay. We've traced the wire up to this little clip here, which is just simply a push in and pull. If I get my hands in there while I'm filming, you're not going to see it. But literally, it's just a clip that pushes in on the metal part of the clip, and the two plastic parts will pull apart. I'm going to pull that cable through. You are very unlikely to be able to remove the ABS sensor on a hub like this without damaging it and then needing to replace it. So you're better off taking it with the hub rather than trying to take it off the hub. So there's our two ends. There's our female end. You push the little clip in, and that's the other end that goes to the sensor that slides in there. There is an orientation, so you can't get it wrong. You can't put it in the wrong way. If you're trying to put it in, it won't fit. Try the way up. That's for later, obviously, but helpful. Now the discs aren't always just going to come off as you'd think they would. So again, if you've got a copper hammer or a hide hammer, a little tap on the face and the back of it to get it moving, and remove it. If it was particularly tight, wire wheel this off afterwards, and the face of this, and that stops any interference, and you could end up getting brake wobble in there. So we don't want that. With the disc aside, out of the way of the brakes, we've now got the ABS cable. You've got to be careful with that. You don't want to be damaging it or smashing it, but it's good to get it out of the way now, or disconnected, so if once the hub drops, you're not pulling on this cable. There's only 3 things to undo now. We have the ball joint at the bottom here, we have the track rod end coming to here, and then a large bolt at the back, a nut and bolt, which actually holds this, pinches it onto the upright or the strut or the damper, depending on what part of the world you're from. That's still nice and free, which is a good sign. Okay, so let's get this apart, one step at a time. So in this instance, it's a 17mm if I remember correctly, could be a 16, maybe a 15, but usually 17s or 16s. Again, we're going to use a cheat gun because this works a treat on these. But you've got to listen out if it starts spinning. You're going to weigh your joint out if it starts spinning. There we go. See, it started spinning. It started spinning when it gets to the top of those threads and it gets caught up a little bit. So the trick with that, well, we're going to get the jack that we've used to raise the vehicle. I'm going to put some pressure underneath this joint. Like that. And do that again. You could be doing this by hand as well with a spanner. Still spinning a little bit more pressure. There we go. It took quite a lot of pressure of that. That's fine. And then we drop that down. Move the pressure off that. And then there's a couple of methods. You could use a copper hammer and tap lightly on there. Ideally you'd want the nut back on there for the same principle as that. We don't want to damage the threads. Or you hit the side of this here, the hub, not the joint. Again, you don't want to be slipping and hitting those threads. So we're just going to, by hand, put that nut back on there so that if you did slip, you'd hit the nut and not the joint. You see that? So we didn't hit the joint, didn't hit the rubber, didn't hit the top. We hit the actual hub itself and the joint dropped down and out of the way. Okay, so now we have quite a free hub. It's going well. Next step is to undo this here. Now these can also be 16s or 17s depending on if they're an original. So it's now a 16. The originals are 16s, sometimes replacements are 17s. And this might spin as well, but let's find out. Yep, she's spinning. So we're going to get a spanner on the other side, which is probably a 17. Yep, so 17 spanner, 16 socket. And that's got that out. What that does mean is give it a little tap with a copper hammer and she will fall straight out into your hands. Lovely. That's what that should look like. Please note that this is not a normal bolt. I mean, it's normal by looking quite normal, but it has this flanged end, this shoulder. And that's actually what pinches inside that ball joint. So if it's just a thread all the way, it's the wrong bolt. Get the right one fitted. Okay. Next step. We're going to open up the jaws, if you like, of this ball joint because it's actually split this hub. It's difficult to see. I was trying to show you on the other side. So can you see that split? So we're going to put in a lever bar, or it could be a punch, and just try and open that up a little bit. And that is going to help us when we try and bring down the lower arm off of the hub. So I'm just trying to spread that out a little bit. Or I might tap it in like a wedge, just to release it that little bit. And then, when we get a much longer lever bar in there, and try and lift or push, there we go, the ball joint off the hub, it's more compliant. He says, more compliant. Ha! Now if it is still tight, you need to push in on the hub while you lever down on the lower arm, on the wishbone, or we can get things moving by tapping in, moving down. There's a few different methods for this. Put a bit of spray in there just to free off the top of that pin, which is often what's catching, like this. Or we just get a longer lever bar, someone leaving up and down on it. I'm being a bit abusive to the boot, by the way, because it's wrecked, but do be careful. You don't need to wreck your boot for no reason. We are nearly there. So what I'm going to do is put a little bit of pressure downward on there and hammer the lower arm down until it is out of my way. There we go. See that? Okay, and at this point we push the drive shaft through the hub, lift it out and plop it to one side. Now be careful if you're doing the passenger or near side. It's very easy to pull the shaft out of the gearbox and have gearbox oil all over your driveway. A world of pain. So we just put it to one side, careful not to pull the drive shaft. All that's now holding this hub to the vehicle is the bolt at the back here. Now from memory, that's an 18. Again, it depends. No, it's definitely not an 18. Might not even be a 17. I might be wrong there. From my memory, it's not always that great. It's a 16. Well, it was an even number. It's close. So we're going to undo that 16. All the way. There we go. And then we're going to just reapply that nut like we did on the other ones, so that when we give it a little tap to try and free it off a little bit, even with the copper hammer, we don't damage any threads. Okay. Now we can do the same. There's a few different trick methods with opening up the jaws on this as well. So if you look at the back of that hub, you can see there's a split. Now you could put a square drive in there and turn it quarter turn. That does work quite well, if I'm honest. We also should have had some nice bit of this stuff just soaking on it before. That probably would have been helpful. And here's your ABS sensor in there, so we've got to be super careful that we don't damage that. Knock it with a hammer, screwdriver, bash it, bend it. And there's our ABS ring. We don't want to damage those things, and again, a world of pain when you put it back together. Right, so I'm not going to try and use a trick. Instead, we're simply going to hope that the strut top's in good condition, and we're going to tap on the top of this hub. Don't damage your bracket, don't hit the hub face, don't damage your ABS sensor, so don't whack those things. Whack on the top of there, and this should slide down off the strut. Off a few whacks, just check at the top here to see if it's moving. If it's not, we may have to go in with a trick on the back. So yeah, we're going to get some other tools. So here we have a 3/8 square drive, I think, or it's a 10mm. Oh, it's 8mm, sorry, 8mm. So it's probably not 3/8. And we're going to tap it in that wedge in the back. So it's nice and tight in there. And then we're going to turn it, and that will increase the diameter of that, as you imagine, as it turns. It'll open up that. Sometimes they just fall off then, or a little tap and they drop out. Okay, there is our hub, now free from everything else. A little grotty on there, we'll clean that up before we put it back together. But for now, let's take this over to another part of the workshop and get part of that hub out, that hub face or that axle face out of the hub and the bearing. Yeah. So there's a few schools of thought here. I'm just going to show you how I do it, okay? If you've never done this sort of job before and you've got this far, you're doing amazing. If you haven't got a press that's at least 10 ton in strength, I would suggest you just take your new bearing with all the bits with it, take this hub in to a friendly nearby garage with a tenner and a couple of beers and say, hey, would you mind pressing in a new bearing for me? Let them carry on. If you've got access to a press, then moving on with the next steps of this video. Otherwise, take that to your friendly garage, they put the bearing in for you, press it, do it all correctly, you bring it home and you just put it back together in the same order but in reverse that we took it apart. And you'll be golden, alright? However, otherwise, if you're going to try and do it yourself, let's crack on. The first thing we're going to do is remove the hub flange from the inside of the bearing. That's just pressed in from this direction. So actually, before we even get to the press, I tend to smack them out with a hammer, because it's actually very hard to get this hub on a press with such little things to push down on, because you need to push that down, so you need to secure this. There is ways. I just find it easier just to smack it out with a hammer, really do. So I put these ears on a piece of wood, 32mm socket, hammer, hit it, job done. Okay, now at this stage, this is almost guaranteed to have happened, which is where the hub flange has taken the outer race of the bearing with it. You can see the bearing exposed. So, we now need to very carefully, using either a hacksaw or a cutting disc, cut through 99% of this without touching this face or this face, and then put a splitter splitter, sorry. Put a punch in between, flat bladed like chisel, to split it open and break it apart. Always wear your safety glasses with this. It can go all over the place. And on the hub side, we're going to give that a good clean up now with a wire wheel, and then soak it down because we need to get this clip out, and they're notorious for getting seized in. So, clean her up. So FYI, there are proper bearing pullers that you could clamp into this and pull this off. I haven't had much joy with those in the past, and I do own one. It's unlikely you've got one. So as you can see, I've cut a groove through that race that's still stuck on this. We went off, but I haven't gone so far through to touch this. You don't want to damage this at all, okay? So just a hair off. And I find it either, you can't really cut it that way unless you've got a tiny little cutting wheel, and of course a square cutting wheel doesn't exist. So I tend to go along the level of it. And then with this little blunt metal chisel, I'll punch that in there, and that will split it open. Wear eye protection, it can buzz off in different places, and that'll open that up and it'll just come straight off, I promise. Literally, it took 2 smacks, and you can see the crack then. So it basically, you split and you break the last piece of that, and then it'll just tap off. Looks like I did just touch it. That looks old, actually, to be fair to me. I don't think I did quite touch it. Just in a similar place. And there we go. That's that race off. Now, if you're still taking it to a garage, doing this bit will make them love you a bit more. Bear in mind, you can still do this bit at home without needing a press, because this is a nasty bit of the job, as this is. So let's get this over to the bench. We've given it a soak, and we're going to get a pair of those special pliers that we hopefully showed earlier in the video to squeeze that together to get this clip out. Eye protection again is suggested. It can just ping off, and if it won't move, we're going to use the same punch, and we're going to hook in behind there, knock it that way, and on this one hit it that way to get them moving. It will be wedged in there tough. Again, if you can do this before you go to the garage, if you are using a garage, they're going to love you, and they're going to happily do it for just a couple of beers, because the next bit's easy if you've got the press. If you haven't got the press, obviously go to the garage, or a mate that's got a big press, or a workshop, some sort of workshop that's got a big press. Yeah, sure. Right, I'm hoping you can just see this. So it wasn't moving initially, so I've got this punch, this blunt chisel. I'm just trying to move it round like that until it gets moving or it's bouncing, and then you can get your fancy pliers, little pin nose things, and give it a squeeze. You see that one side still doesn't want to move though? There we go, now she's moving. There we go. And gently release it so it doesn't fly off into your face or your bodywork or your neighbour's garden. Okay, well done. You have done the hard bits of this job. You've got this clip out. We've got the hub face out of the bearing. So all that remains is to push this bearing out and push the new one in. So, off to the big press. Hope that's been useful, that guide. That's the end if you're happy and feel competent to put it back together. Obviously the fitment is a reversal of removal. However, I'm going to just record me in time lapse putting it back together, so you can pause at any point if you're not sure the method or the order in which I put it back together. Just take your time, make sure you don't damage your CV boot and your ball joint boot and your track rod end boot, and just put it back together. I'll put the torque specs either up on the video or down in the description for you if you're going to be going that far. I suggest you do that specifically with the main nut that goes on the drive shaft. If you haven't got a torque wrench that goes that high, then just get a breaker bar on it and do it as tight as you can. That will probably be close to spec.